basketball fans, it's me, DC, here for Fantasy Basketball Analyzer. I help you get ready for your fantasy basketball season, fantasy basketball draft. We're talking the 22-23 NBA season, and I'm pumped. Today, as of recording, is media day, so we're getting all fun little clips, lots of, nonsense from coaches and stuff, but there are some fun moments. Pop had a good one, and then I'll be, tweeting out and whatever. But we're going to break down the NBA season. This is one of those things that is important, but I feel like can be overweighted. So I'm going to talk about the things I care about and some of the things you care about. I'll try and give you a little input on how much I think it matters when entering your draft. It's all going to matter at some point during the season, but I feel like sometimes we're disproportionately considering things when making, say, a first or second round pick or last round picks or things like that. We're going to start out by bringing up the numbers. If you're new to the channel, I do a lot of this with spreadsheets and stuff. So here it is. Here's a full season look all the way till the end. Now, your league might not be playing all the way till the end. I hope it's not. But we're going to take this big overhead view at first because it'll cover everyone, and then we can get more specific. The first couple things I want to jump out at you is the anomaly weeks, right? So San Antonio, week 5, they get a 5-game week. That is rare, and that's nice if you get it. Obviously, I'm not saying draft someone just because they have a 5-game week at some point, especially the Spurs that don't have a ton of fantasy goodness. Every team's got some guys and stuff like that, but they're going through their rebuild. They've sent away some pieces and stuff like that, so I don't want you to weight this too heavily. But it's interesting to see that there. And then week 14 gets extra screwy. We've got a good 5-game week for Toronto, which is exciting. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have 2 teams with only 1 game that week. This is Chicago and Detroit. Do you know why they only have 1 game that week? I'm vamping here. I'm stalling for a minute so you can make your guess, shout at your phone or TV or computer or whatever you're watching this on. They've got 1 game that week in week 14 because they're playing in Paris. So it technically counts as a home game for Detroit, but they've only got 1 game because of the travel, which is a thing we see sometimes with the NFL schedule and going, overseas to play a game, but it's newer to go over there. I think it's the first game in France for NBA during the regular season. So that week, your fantasy guys are going to be mostly unusable. It's worse than a weekly lock league, but either way, only 1 game is kind of killer. The other 1 games you see on the schedule fall mostly in week 18, which is leading into All-Star break. Most fantasy platforms combine week 18 and week 19 into 1 super week. They handle a little different. On Yahoo, if you're a weekly lock league, you can actually change it in between. On ESPN, at least traditionally, you couldn't change it and it'll be set. Most people don't play fantasy basketball with weekly locks as much as I do love it. So it's a tiny note. It may not apply to you. What I think actually gets interesting here is towards the end of the schedule. If you're looking at this week 20 through 23, there's a lot of 2-game weeks, and that's going to matter for the fantasy playoffs. Now, here's where I offer another caution. I definitely think it's worth looking at this. I think it has a huge impact later in the season. I don't always draft based on what's going to happen for the fantasy playoffs. Can that change here or there? Yeah. Is it a good tiebreaker if you're not sure who you want to go with on 2 guys? Yeah, I think that's an excellent reason to make an educated decision. But the way we're looking at the schedule right now, and everyone's healthy as far as we know, although they're not, but let's pretend they are. Everyone's got 82 games, unless you're cutting off some weeks, and that depends. So the fact that if they've got 2 games later, that means they played more games earlier, and that helps you make the playoffs. So there's a give and take to it, so I don't want to give it too much credit. But it is worth noting depending on where your playoffs start. So let's talk about this. This is the ESPN default schedule. It's 4 weeks of playoffs because each round is 2 heads. 2 heads? 2 weeks of a head-to-head matchup. It says week 24, but notice here I've combined the All-Star week. So it's week 18, part 1 and part 2. So it's really going to week 25, which is the dead end of the season, which I hate. I never want to play to the end because people will be resting, getting ready for the playoffs and stuff like that. Does it happen before the first week? Yeah, but there's good and bad about taking too much off. Oftentimes, I'd recommend taking 2 weeks off. If you're the commissioner or you have the commissioner's ear, try and chop a little bit off. This year, though, it gets a little interesting. If you look right here, because we're still viewing the whole schedule, right? Well, week 21, week 22, they've got a bunch of 2-game weeks. Week 23 does not. So one of the bonuses of going maybe a little too long in your NBA season for your fantasy league is that come championship week, everyone will have 3 or 4 games. And I feel a little better about that than, say, 2 games. I mean, if we're looking and talking about certain high draft picks with only 2 games, we got Miami with only 2 games in week 22. Denver, we're going to lose Jokic. We're going to lose Jimmy, Bam. Like, these are some guys, obviously Jokic is like going in the top 1 overall, depending on your league, top 3, we'll say. That's a bigger impact than, say, Jimmy Butler, but you still don't want to be down with only 2 games when the next week, say, Denver has 4 games. That's going to make a difference. Even someone like Cade Cunningham, it'd be a bummer to only get 2 games, where if you went a week longer, you get 4 games. Now, we don't know if everyone's going to be healthy. That's really going to happen. But that's maybe the argument against cutting too much off this year. And the thing with cutting stuff off, well, it makes sense when you're counting on, say, LeBron resting if the Lakers for sure have a playoff seed locked up, blah, 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 which happened maybe more in the past than now. The other part of it is you can't avoid tanking somewhere else. OKC is probably going to start tanking right after the All-Star break. If they're not in the mix of it, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is probably just going to get shut down. He's already got an injury coming into the season, so it gives him plenty of excuse to shut him down if he's even got a little thing wrong, because they're going to go for top draft picks. They're going to be like Utah. They've been doing it every year. Some point it'll change, but what I'm saying is cutting off a couple weeks in the end doesn't change that some players are still going to be out. Nothing's going to be perfect. Find the solution that works best for you. If you guys hate the tanking, trim a little bit off. I plead you to at least drop the last week off. But if you take too much off, then your season's shorter, and that's no fun either. There's a give and take to it. So this is the ESPN default that I've been talking over. You can see this here. By the way, the spreadsheet I'm using, the link is down below. It's always down below. You can check it out. Anyone can check it out. If your playoff format is not here on my grid, leave a comment on this video. I will make it. I do this every year. I'll make extra tabs because if your playoffs are a different timing, someone else's probably is too. I'll make that for you so that we can keep updating it all season long, see how remaining games impact that. Switching from the ESPN default to the Yahoo default, it does lop the last week off. So now we're looking at 3 individual weeks, in a head-to-head matchup. Obviously, none of this applies for Roto, where you don't have it. That's a whole different thing. But here, if you look at this, you can kind of look at the spread. Now, does it matter if your team plays less games in the playoffs? Yeah, for sure. If Charlotte's only got 9 games and I could be getting 12 out of Houston, that makes a difference for sure. Does that change who I want to take in, say, the 4th or 5th round? For me, no, it doesn't. Because right now, by only cutting 1 week off, everyone still has 78 or 79 games. And like I said, if you're short in the playoffs, are you going to want them there? Yeah, but that meant they played more early on and they helped you win and make it to the playoffs. This really tells me of where I need to maybe make moves later in the season. Before the All-Star break or something like that, I want to start moving to try and shore up my team when the playoffs come, and we'll talk about that as the season goes on, because I'll be here making videos all season long. If that's really important to you, or you're in a league that doesn't trade, then you can wait this and shuffle your draft a little bit more to be ready, but you do still have to make it to the playoffs, and nothing's a foregone conclusion. And if you take a guy who ends up getting injured, then none of this matters anyway, and that's where I just don't want you stressing and getting a hairline like mine. Now, if we're talking about people missing games, another thing to consider, again, I don't draft just because of this, but there are certain players I do want to take this into account, is how many back-to-backs they play. Nowadays, the NBA is playing more and more games. Physical trainers are understanding the importance of rest and keeping guys healthy for the playoffs. Well, it's a bummer for fantasy, and it's a bummer if you happen to go to a game and your star is resting. It's great when everyone's still healthy for the playoffs. We want to see the best basketball when it matters most, so there's a give and take to it, right? So certain guys we can pretty much count on sitting. Kawhi. I'm getting at Kawhi. I haven't said Kawhi's name. We're clearly talking about Kawhi. We didn't have him last year. We've seen him in other years rest on back-to-back. That's a given. The Clippers have the most back-to-backs of any team. They have 15 back-to-backs. They aren't alone with 15 back-to-backs, but Kawhi jumps out as one that I'm extra concerned about. So the Bulls also have 15 back-to-backs, but I'm not expecting Zach LaVine to automatically be resting. Will Lonzo probably rest on that? Yes, but Lonzo's already hurt coming into the season. So besides him missing those back-to-backs, you're also going to miss some weeks at the start of the year. It doesn't necessarily impact you as much as, say, taking a high second-round pick in Kawhi. I'm not saying don't draft Kawhi, but I just want you to know that out of the 82 or 79, if you aren't playing the last week, you can lop 15 of those games off right there, pretty much count on him not playing. There's a few other players like that. Kawhi is one big standout. At the other end, Zion, the Pelicans only have 12 back-to-backs. I'm assuming they're going to rest him. Obviously, Zion's had health issues. There's not a known for sure thing that'll always sit on back-to-backs, but if he does, it's only 12 games, so at least he gets 3 more if he stays healthy all season, and I hope so. He's a lot of fun to watch, but you never know. You can see here on this grid that I actually took from Basketball Monster. I went to the website and found an easy grid, so I'm just using that as a graphic, so I want to give them credit. So you can look here for your own. I want to call out a couple names, people to maybe think about or what I think on that, but again, none of this should say don't draft. For instance, Philly, 13 back-to-backs. That's pretty low. Embiid last year didn't rest on back-to-backs. Has he in the past? Yes. I give him a bunch of credit for staying healthy most of the year. Playing on back-to-backs, that was great. Is it different now with Harden? Does Harden rest? Maybe. I don't think anything's a guarantee that they sit, but it's worth noting. Boston, I think they're ready despite the coaching fiasco, we'll say, going on there. They're clearly trying to get back to the finals. I think they are going to rest guys a little bit more. I think people like Al Horford, we saw how important they are in the playoffs, and they should rest him more if they can. Now, Rob Williams going back in for another surgery to get that cleaned up, which, probably means it didn't work the first time. Hopefully he's back. When he's back, I don't know if he's going to play on back-to-back. Al Horford played on back-to-backs last year. I didn't expect it, so I don't know. They've got 13 games. They can't count on it, but just be aware. Some of these teams are really fighting for it are more likely to rest some guys. Golden State is in that 15-game camp, so they're probably going to rest some guys, but there's no track history there of someone missing every time. Do they do it for Clay? I don't know. Maybe. Steph Curry's probably not going to sit every back-to-back. He'll sit some, but if it's 8 or 9, you can't predict these injuries. Ja Morant got hurt for the final 2 weeks of last season. Had nothing to do with back-to-backs. You're going to lose 8 or 9 games in anyone's season these days. Other teams, quick wrap up. Miami's got 14. Jimmy Butler's probably going to rest those. Brooklyn's got 14. KD, Kyrie, not a given. Kyrie's schedule, never a given. So I'm just mentioning that. We can't really predict on that. Already talked about the Bulls having 15. Washington has 14. So you can pretty much guess Porzingis isn't going to play that. Hopefully he's healthy enough that you get enough out of him all season that missing 14 games for back-to-back is the least of the issues, and then you're just happy to have him and back producing. All right, the flip side of, say, the back-to-backs and losing guys due to scheduling is how valuable your schedule can be, which means I'm talking about quality games. If you've played before, or if you watched this channel before, you know what I'm talking about. But if you haven't, let me say it right here at the top. Quality games is an idea to try and capture how few games are playing that day. If you're making a daily change league, this won't matter as much in weekly lock leagues, but if you're changing your lineup on days when there's a lot of games being played, say there's 10 games being played, right? That means 20 of the 30 NBA teams are playing. You're not going to get any of your bench guys in, right? You're playing your superstars, your lineup's full, guys are collecting stats on your bench, and this doesn't really matter. When you can get some extra games, squeeze some extra steals and blocks out of guys that maybe aren't your high performers, but can help you win those categories or get you extra points in a points league. That's where it really matters. And that can help you win your week to week matchups. For that, we want to play guys with lower games. Generally, quality games, people are talking 8 games or less. 8 games, 16 teams, that's just over half the league. So if you're playing that, you probably have some empty slots. I've got this grid here that's going to show 8 games or less because it's commonly referred to, but where it's less than 8 is definitely half the league. And so I actually kind of waited for that. If I'm looking at this on the flip side of the Clippers having 15 back-to-backs, which isn't great, they have the most quality games. 38 of their 82 games are being played on games with less than 8 games. You're going to get to use them a lot. So if you have bench players on there, you're going to get them in. Does this really impact your superstars? No, you're going to play your superstars. I don't care if Booker has a quality game, right? We can go look up what Phoenix's schedule is, but if he's playing, I'm not playing a bench player over him. I'm playing my superstar. But maybe at the end of your bench, this is where you can actually think about this in the later rounds, and it might help you. So down at the very bottom, we've got Houston in the less than 8 category having the worst quality game count with only 20 games like that. Now, they're not the worst if I go 8 or less, the quality, the common parlance of it. That's 35. That means Atlanta and Indiana have the worst. It ties them with Chicago for still at the bottom. But this is something that I think can factor in. I don't want you to sweat it because there's a good chance the players you take at the end of your bench might be cut anyway. You get it week 1 or 2, you're picking up someone who's exploding, getting extra minutes you didn't expect. You're saying, who's this in Sacramento? Oh, I didn't even know about them. Or there's some rookie, playing in Houston. And you're like, okay, great. This is a guy, or someone's injured and backup comes. Any of that can happen. So don't sweat it too much. But there is something to this. If you're thinking about, say the Bulls, they're down here, right? 35, if you're talking 8 or less, 23. Someone like Patrick Williams, I'll hear about him for a sleeper. Maybe that's just because the Bulls like him so much. They kept talking about how he wouldn't be put in any of the trade scenarios. So now it's trickling into some fantasy advice and stuff. If you're thinking of him for the end of your bench, hoping he's healthy, hoping he pops for you, I think that's fine. Because if he pops and you're playing him regular, it doesn't matter what his quality games are. But if you're just looking for a specialist to try and get you some defensive stats or something like that, maybe you don't want to be looking at Houston, Minnesota, Atlanta, Portland, because they're playing on all of these days when there are more games. But I mentioned Minnesota. Am I staying away from Rudy Gobert because of that? No, Rudy Gobert is giving you something special. Very few fantasy players that you can draft is going to give you that, especially for category leagues. So take the guy, you're going to play him over whatever, JaVale McGee, whoever else is going to be your backup that you're going to plug into the center spot. So don't worry about this too much, but I do think it's interesting, and it can shift throughout the season as we go on. And if there becomes an imbalance, there's a moment to really strike or pick up a guy that's going to have a lot of quality games, especially when you get to the playoffs. That's going to do it for this video. If you have any topics you want me to cover leading up to the season, leave it in the comments down below. Love to get your ideas. I want to come at you hot and heavy, help you get ready for your fantasy draft. We're about 3 weeks away from tip-off to the NBA season. That's very exciting. I've set up a couple fantasy leagues for fans. Set up one on Yahoo, one on ESPN. Not that we can't use other platforms. I want to try a couple different formats so I can talk things. I don't really like playing points leagues. I know a lot of people do. It'd be helpful for me to have an easy league that I can just look at and review points when people are asking questions about that. I prefer category leagues though, so we can talk about that. I've also got a Patreon set up that I've never really pushed, but I want to bring more videos for you. So if there is interest in supporting the channel, or you have ideas of things you would like me to put in as rewards, maybe first access to these group fantasy leagues or anything else, leave that down in the comments. I'm excited for the season. I hope you are too. I'm coming at you real soon. I know you're not playing fantasy basketball yet, so go out there in the world and win your week. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far, please hit the like button and leave a comment down below. It helps me grow the channel. If you want more videos like this, hit subscribe or even the little bell will give you alerts, and I'll be back soon with another video for you.